Today's topic is cessation of suffering. Everybody wants to stop suffering. In Buddhism, nirvana is cessation of suffering. Why do we have suffering? Suffering, it is part of our feelings. One is with our body, one is with our mind. We might have feeling of pain or feeling of pleasure in our body. When we experience unfavorable conditions, we will have the emotion of sadness. When we experience favorable conditions, we have joy. Our body and mind will have pain or happiness. They might also have neutral feeling, so not happy or not sad. These are the 5 kinds of feelings. Little do we know that pleasure, joy, and neutral, they are actually fictional. Only pain and sadness are the fact of life. Joy and pleasure only happen because there is a temporary stop of pain or sadness. It's only a temporary happiness. Therefore, we call it unreal. And pleasure will eventually turn into suffering. For example, if I eat a piece of chocolate cake, one piece brings me lots of pleasure. If I eat 100, it becomes a big suffering. All feelings eventually will be suffering. That is the truth. Now let's talk about suffering in more detail. There are 3 basic kinds. 1, suffering of suffering. 2, suffering of changes. 3, pervasive suffering. Suffering of suffering, that's the pain that everybody knows that is suffering. Suffering of changes is when the pleasure and joy changes into suffering. When the pleasure and the joy disappears. Pervasive suffering is a continuous movement of our thoughts. From moment to moment, the endless thoughts that we have. Let's go back to the basic suffering. There are 8 general kinds of suffering. Number 1 is birth. When we are in the mother's womb, the baby is in present for 9 months. So that is suffering. And when the mother is giving birth, pushing the baby out, that is suffering. So birth itself is a big suffering. Number 2, aging. When we get to old ages, our body declines. We walk slower, we have white hair, we have wrinkles, and everything is deteriorating. That is a suffering. We have sickness when the 4 elements of our body, earth, fire, water, and wind, are out of balance. We will have sickness. Then we will have death. Go through a lot of pain at the moment of death. The sutra says it's like you yank the turtle out of its shell. The reincarnation that happens after death, that's even more suffering. So the first 4 are the suffering of our body. The next 3 are mental suffering. Number 5, separation from our loved ones. Sometimes we have to move. Our loved ones, they might die. They leave us. That is a big suffering. Number 6, we might be surrounded by people that we dislike. For example, our relatives at work, our classmates, or enemies. We cannot leave them. We might be in the same household, same company. There's nothing you can do to get away from these people. And because you have karma with them in your prior lifetime, so they are in your life right now. So that is a big suffering, surrounded with these people you dislike. Number 7, not getting what we desire. We want a good job, we want to have money, we can never get what we want because of our karma. Number 8, suffering of the 5 aggregates. Our body and mind, because of its existence, we think that's the self. that is already a big suffering. The 5 aggregates: form, feelings, our perception, our mental formation, and consciousness. The fact that they're constantly moving and changing, and we think that's a self, that's a me, that's already a big suffering. We call it the suffering of being alive, or suffering of being too healthy. Because of our 5 aggregates, we are always looking for stimulants. When we are healthy, we want to go party, we want to go travel, we want to have excitement, because we're too bored. But little do we know, the 5 aggregates, they are the cause for the first 7 sufferings. These are the basic sufferings that every one of us go through every single day. Then we have the suffering of changes. When pleasure and joy changes, we have too much, or the pain returns, the sickness comes back, it becomes suffering. So any happiness, eventually they will change into suffering. 3, pervasive suffering. Most of us, if we don't have samadhi or deep concentration, we cannot detect this kind of suffering. The constant movement of our mind, that's actually the biggest suffering. These sufferings are what's making up the 3 rounds of samsara. We are constantly reincarnating in these 3 places. Right now, we are in the world of desire. We have the desire for food, for lust, for sleep. Mainly because of our greediness, our desire, we stay in this world. This world is full of suffering, suffering of changes, and pervasive suffering. Second is the realm of form. There are 18 levels in this world. They're all heavenly beings. They're out of the realm of the desire. They don't have the suffering of suffering, but they do have suffering of changes because they still have a form. They have body. They don't need to eat. They don't have to sleep. They don't have lust. So they are out of the realm of desire. But their body will still deteriorate. As long as you have a body, you still have suffering of changes and the pervasive suffering. Lastly, the even higher realm, the realm of formlessness. These heavenly beings, in these 4 top levels, they don't even have a body, but they still have consciousness. Therefore, they still have pervasive suffering. They still have a self. So having a self is already a big suffering. As long as we are in reincarnation, we are full of suffering. So what do we do now? Buddha gave us medicine to cure our sickness of reincarnation. So there are 4 basic types of teaching. Number 1, Tripitaka teaching. That's the Theravada Buddhism. How do we explain suffering? Impermanence is suffering. Suffering caused by the constant changing of conditions. Because everything is condition arising, therefore everything is constantly changing. Because it's impermanent, it is suffering. Our body will change, everything changes. But what if you accept impermanence? I accept aging when it comes. I accept sickness when it comes. And I accept the time of my death. Then they are not suffering anymore. So the key of Theravada Buddhists is to accept impermanence. Number 2 is the common teaching. Common to the Theravada and common to Mahayana. This common teaching is prajna, the Mahayana prajna of emptiness. What if you know your whole life is a dream. Suffering is a dream. Samsara is a dream. Nirvana is a dream. Why would it matter to you anymore? So in this school of teaching, emptiness of the 5 aggregates is the way to leave suffering. This body and mind is empty of any intrinsic nature. Your feeling of suffering, that is only because you have a self. But all these is illusory. They are empty in nature, and it's not worth being caught up in the suffering. So if we can contemplate on the emptiness of the 5 aggregates, we can leave all sufferings. That's basically the teaching of the Heart Sutra. Number 3, the distinctive teaching, especially for Mahayana Bodhisattvas. They understand that all things are created by the mind, or we call it the consciousness-only school of Buddhism. All sufferings are only discrimination of our mind. If you don't perceive things as suffering, it's no longer a suffering. What if I say sickness, it's good? If I've never been sick, how would I know their pain when other people are getting sick? So for Bodhisattva, suffering, it brings out a great compassion for all sentient beings. And suffering will bring out the diligence of a Bodhisattva. Patience. When a Bodhisattva is surrounded by people that they dislike, they find a way to love them, to change the karma, to change the relationship. They always use negative relationship to help deliver people and great love. So for Bodhisattva, they know to use their mind to change all situation, change all suffering into enlightenment, into nirvana. So they know to work on their mind. Number 4 is the complete teaching. Samsara is nirvana. Samsara is what we call suffering. When we are enlightened, we are with our Buddha nature. All these suffering do not exist anymore. It's only the one absolute reality, which is the reality of the pure mind. There is no samsara, there is no nirvana, only one pure Buddha nature, the true suchness. It is what it is. So when you experience suffering, it doesn't matter anymore. At that moment, as long as you align with your Buddha nature, at that moment, you are already the Buddha. That is called the complete or perfect teaching. 4 different levels of wisdom to help us reach nirvana, or what we call the cessation of suffering. I hope with this teaching, you will be free from all your suffering. At least know how to deal with all your suffering right now. Thank you so much for listening. Amitabha.